In 1965, Margaret Elena Rodriguez stood in her tiny Chicago apartment, watching the snow fall through a cracked window while her 3 young children slept on the single mattress they all shared. Her husband had left 6 months earlier, taking their savings and leaving behind only unpaid bills and broken promises. At 28 years old, with a 4th-grade education and barely speaking English, Margaret faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could surrender to despair, or she could fight. Margaret chose to fight. The next morning, Margaret walked 12 blocks in worn shoes to Mrs. Chen's alterations shop, where she begged for work. "I can sew," she said in broken English, showing calloused hands that had been mending clothes since she was 8 years old in rural Mexico. Mrs. Chen, seeing desperation mixed with determination, offered her $2 an hour to hem pants and repair torn seams. Every morning at 5 a.m., Margaret would kiss her sleeping children goodbye and begin her day. She worked at the shop until 3 p.m., then rushed home to care for her kids. After tucking them into bed with stories and songs, she would sit at her kitchen table under a single light bulb, taking in piecework from other shops, sewing buttons, mending tears, creating miracles with thread and determination. Her children, Maria, 8, Carlos, 6, and little Anna, 4, learned to make their own breakfast and walk to school together. They wore clothes Margaret had sewn from fabric scraps, carried lunches made from whatever she could afford, and never complained when dinner was beans and rice for the 5th night in a row. "Mija," Margaret would tell Maria when her daughter asked why other kids had store-bought dresses, "we may not have much money, but we have each other, and someday you'll understand why Mama works so hard." Margaret knew that sewing alone wouldn't lift them out of poverty. 3 nights a week, after her children were asleep, she walked to the community center for English classes. She studied by candlelight when the electricity was shut off, practiced pronunciation while hemming skirts, and dreamed in 2 languages. At the alterations shop, Margaret watched everything: how Mrs. Chen spoke to customers, how she priced work, how she managed inventory. She asked questions, even when other workers laughed at her accent. She took notes in a small notebook that became her Bible of business knowledge. The children grew accustomed to their mother's absence, but they also learned resilience. Maria learned to braid Anna's hair for school. Carlos figured out how to fix the broken radio with wire and tape. They became a team, bound by necessity and love. In 1968, Margaret noticed something others had missed. The women in her neighborhood were wearing their good dresses to church on Sundays, but they all looked the same, store-bought and impersonal. She had an idea. Using $20 she had saved penny by penny, Margaret bought fabric and spent 3 weeks creating 5 original dresses. She wore one to church and hung the others in the shop window with a sign: "Custom dresses by Margaret, $15. By the following Sunday, all 5 dresses were sold. Word spread quickly through the community. Margaret had a gift. She could look at a woman and know exactly what style would make her feel beautiful. Her dresses weren't just clothing. They were confidence sewn into fabric. Margaret began taking custom orders, working until 2 a.m. most nights. Her children would find her asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on sketches of dress designs. They learned to cover her with a blanket and start coffee before school. The business grew, but so did the challenges. Margaret had to learn about taxes, licenses, and regulations, all in her second language. She made mistakes that cost her money she couldn't afford to lose. There were weeks when she chose between buying groceries and buying fabric, always choosing to keep her business alive because it was their only path to a better future. "Why does Mama always choose work over us?" Carlos asked Maria one night when Margaret missed his school play for the 3rd time. Maria, now 12 and wise beyond her years, hugged her little brother. "Because she's building something for us. You'll see." In 1971, Margaret's big break came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, the wife of a prominent businessman, saw one of Margaret's dresses at church and commissioned her to make dresses for her daughter's entire wedding party. The wedding was featured in the society pages of the Chicago Tribune, with a photo caption mentioning "stunning dresses by local designer Margaret Rodriguez." Orders poured in. Margaret realized she needed help and hired 3 other immigrant women, teaching them not just to sew, but to dream. Her kitchen table became a design studio, her living room a showroom, and her life's work began to take shape. By 1975, Margaret had opened her first real store, Margaret's Custom Designs. Her children, now teenagers, worked there after school. Maria had inherited her mother's eye for design, Carlos proved gifted at business and numbers, and Ana had a talent for making customers feel special. The shop became the heart of the community. Margaret didn't just sell dresses, she listened to dreams, celebrated milestones, and provided opportunities for other women who reminded her of herself 10 years earlier. But success came with new sacrifices. Margaret worked 7 days a week, often traveling to fashion shows and fabric markets. Her children grew up in the store, doing homework in the back room, eating dinner surrounded by bolts of fabric and the hum of sewing machines. In 1980, Margaret's story caught the attention of a local news station. The segment, titled "The American Dream Lives in Chicago," showed Margaret at work, surrounded by her thriving business and her accomplished children. At the end of the interview, the reporter asked what she was most proud of. Margaret didn't hesitate. "My children. They sacrificed their childhood so I could build this dream. They are my greatest success." That night, for the first time in 15 years, Maria saw her mother cry, not from exhaustion or frustration, but from overwhelming gratitude. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Margaret's business expanded to include 3 stores and a small factory. She employed over 50 people and was recognized as one of Chicago's most successful small business owners. Her designs were worn by politicians' wives, celebrities, and everyday women who wanted to feel extraordinary. But Margaret never forgot where she came from. She established a scholarship fund for immigrant children, taught business classes at the community center, and mentored dozens of women starting their own enterprises. In 1995, Margaret stood in the ballroom of Chicago's Palmer House Hotel, watching her daughter Maria accept an award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year. Maria now ran her own fashion design company, inspired by her mother's example, but following her own dreams. Carlos had become a successful accountant and managed the financial side of Margaret's business empire. Ana was finishing medical school, determined to help people the way her mother had helped their family. During her acceptance speech, Maria looked directly at her mother. "Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, exists because my mother showed me that love isn't just words, it's sacrifice. It's working until your hands bleed so your children can reach for stars. It's choosing their future over your own comfort, every single day for decades." The audience gave Margaret a standing ovation, but all she could see were her 3 children, now successful adults who finally understood the price of their dreams. But as Margaret entered her 70s, something changed. Her children became consumed with their own success. Maria was constantly traveling, expanding her fashion empire internationally. Carlos was building his accounting firm into a corporate giant. Ana was working 18-hour days at the hospital, climbing the ranks to become chief of surgery. Birthday dinners became quick phone calls. Sunday visits turned into hurried text messages. Christmas gatherings were postponed for business trips and medical conferences. The woman who had sacrificed everything was slowly being forgotten by the very people she had lifted up. Margaret watched from her small apartment window as neighbors' children visited regularly with grandchildren in tow, while her own phone stayed silent for weeks. The hands that had sown thousands of dreams were now empty and lonely. She tried to understand. Her children were busy, successful, important. Wasn't this what she had worked for? But late at night, in the silence of her apartment, Margaret wondered if teaching them to reach for the stars had made them forget the ground their mother still walked on. At 78 years old, Margaret made a decision that would shake her family to its core. She called her lawyer, the same one who had helped her incorporate her business decades earlier, and made some very interesting changes to her will. Then she did something no one expected. Margaret sold her 3 successful stores, her factory, and liquidated all her business assets. The sale brought in $2.3 million. She donated half of it to immigrant scholarship funds and women's shelters across Chicago. With the other half, she bought a beautiful house in Sarasota, Florida, hired a full-time caregiver named Rosa, who became her companion, and began living the retirement she had never allowed herself to enjoy. She took art classes, joined a book club, learned to play poker, and spent her afternoons on the beach collecting seashells. When Maria, Carlos, and Anna discovered what their mother had done, they were shocked and furious. "Mom, what about our inheritance?" Maria demanded during a heated phone call from Milan. "What about the family business we were supposed to inherit?" Carlos protested from his corner office. "How could you give away our future without consulting us?" Anna complained between surgeries. Margaret's response was calm but devastating. "My dear children, for 30 years, I gave you my present so you could have a future. Now that I need your present, where are you?" The phone went silent. "You want an inheritance? You already received it. Your education, your opportunities, your success, that was your inheritance. But you forgot the most important lesson: gratitude. You took my love for granted and assumed it would always be there, waiting for you when it was convenient." She continued, her voice steady but firm. "I spent decades putting your needs before my own. I missed my own dreams to build yours. I sacrificed my youth, my health, my social life, everything for you. And now, when I'm old and could use some of that love returned, you're all too busy counting the money you thought I'd leave you. Love isn't an inheritance, my children. It's a daily choice. And lately, you've been choosing everything else." For the first time in their adult lives, Margaret's children had to face an uncomfortable truth. They realized their mother wasn't just their historical provider. She was a human being who deserved love, respect, and time. They had become so focused on their own success that they had forgotten the woman who made it all possible. Maria canceled her business trips and flew to Florida, finding her mother happier and more vibrant than she'd seen her in years. Carlos took his first vacation in 5 years to spend a week with Margaret. Anna arranged for other doctors to cover her shifts so she could have uninterrupted time with her mother. But Margaret wasn't ready to forgive easily. She had learned something important in her new life. Her own worth wasn't tied to her usefulness to others. "If you want to rebuild our relationship," Margaret told them, "it starts now. Not with guilt, not with promises about the future, but with consistent presence. I don't want duty visits or obligation calls. I want genuine interest in my life as it is now, not just gratitude for what I did in the past." Maria began visiting every month, bringing her teenage children to spend time with their grandmother. They learned Spanish from Margaret and heard stories of her journey they'd never known. Carlos set up weekly video calls and helped his mother write her memoirs, discovering details of her struggles he'd never understood. Anna took a sabbatical to spend 3 months with Margaret, learning family recipes, and finally understanding the depth of her mother's early sacrifices. Margaret lived 8 more beautiful years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had learned that love is a verb, not just a feeling. She traveled with her family, celebrated every birthday and holiday, and was never forgotten again. When she passed away at 86, her will contained one final surprise. She had secretly invested the remaining money and grown it to over $3 million. Every penny went back to her children, but with a letter that changed their perspective forever. My beloved children, this money comes with one condition. Use it to love others the way you learned to love me in my final years. Don't wait until people are gone to appreciate them. Don't assume love can be stored up like savings and withdrawn later when convenient. The greatest inheritance isn't money, it's wisdom. I gave you everything I had, but my final gift is teaching you that love must be given while people are alive to receive it. Now go make me proud by making others feel valued while they're still here to enjoy it. Your mother's revenge wasn't cruelty. It was the greatest act of love I could give you. I taught you that relationships require investment, presence, and priority. Love is not automatic. It must be earned and re-earned every single day. Remember me not just as the woman who worked herself to exhaustion for your dreams, but as the woman who taught you that it's never too late to change, to grow, and to choose love over convenience. Margaret Elena Rodriguez didn't just build a fashion empire. She built a legacy of love that transformed her family forever. Her children learned that the greatest success in life isn't what you achieve, but how you treat the people who helped you achieve it. And sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give their children is teaching them to love while there's still time.